Hello, dear friends of democracy and education, and welcome back. My name is Helen Osieja, and I am your lecturer of international relations and political science. Today, I'm going to talk about the state of Israel, the so-called only democracy in the Middle East. Welcome back to my channel. Is the state of Israel the only democracy in the Middle East? Is the name of this presentation. But before I begin with the presentation, I want to announce that all of the images contained in this video are either created by artificial intelligence or have a Wikimedia Commons, Shutterstock, or other license. This presentation consists of 4 parts. The first one is, what are the main characteristics of a democracy? We have seen that in the presentation of chapter 1 of the book Education for Democracy in the 21st Century. The second part of the presentation deals with the history of Israel, a brief history of the entity, state, country, or we will see what that is. The third part is, does Israel fulfill the characteristics of a democratic state? And the fourth one is the conclusion. Well, I'm going to start by defining the concept of democracy. Democracy comes from the Greek language, from the roots demos, which means people, and kratos, which means power or authority. Thus, democracy means the authority of the people or the rule of the people. In other words, in a democracy, political power emanates from the people and it is transferred to their representatives through elections. Now, what is meant by the concept of state? Well, according to the Montevideo Convention of 1933, there are 4 elements that constitute a state. The first one is a permanent population. The second one is a defined territory. The third one is a government. And the fourth one is the capacity to enter into relations with other states. However, there's a difference between the concept of state and the concept of nation state. Why? Because in a nation state, the people have shared values, language, culture, history, traditions, common ethnic groups, and a sense of a common identity. Like, for example, here in Sweden, these people have common ethnic roots, a common history, common culture, common language, etc. Other states, for example, the United States of America, are multi-ethnic or multinational. The rule of law is perhaps one of the most important pillars of democracy. What does this concept mean? Well, it means that the laws of a country apply equally to everybody. That is, nobody is above the law that he or she can ignore it, and nobody is beneath the law that the law cannot protect this individual. Even public servants are bound by the law and must obey it, or they can face being impeached for not obeying the laws of the country. However, the rule of law also entails equal treatment. That is, that courts Another institutions of the state, for example, the police, must treat all citizens equally, no matter what their gender, their skin color, their religion, their ethnicity, or their age is. Everybody should be treated in the same way. Civil rights. Well, these rights that we take for granted in democracies are rights such as to marry whom we choose, which is not the case in a theocracy, to live our lives according to our convictions, to choose our lifestyle, to demonstrate peacefully and express our opinions. These civil rights apply to all citizens and non-citizens alike, whereas political rights, namely the right to vote and the right to run for office, only apply to citizens of the state and not to foreigners who are there working or living temporarily. Freedom of religion. Well, in a democracy, people are free to practice their religion or to leave or to join another religion, and religion is a purely private matter, just like our sex lives. And people do not need to belong to a religion to access services such as civil marriage, to get a divorce, or to fix a funeral, because there are civil authorities who can do these things. This is not the case in a theocracy, where religious institutions have a great deal of power and carry out these functions. Regarding pluralism, well, what is pluralism? It implies the existence of at least two political parties, at least here in Europe, in countries like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Germany. There are several political parties that form coalitions. However, pluralism means more than one. It means ideological diversity, the existence of several pressure groups, associations, organizations, which have different agendas. We go now to the second part of the presentation, which is a brief history of the state of Israel. Now, there is a great deal of confusion regarding the creation of the so-called Jewish state. Why? Because many Orthodox Jews do not accept Israel as a representative of their faith. Quite the contrary. This is an example of Neturei Karta, and there are other Jewish congregations like the Torah Jews of the United States, with about 15,000 rabbis. They do not recognize the state of Israel as a Jewish state. Why? Well, because there is a main difference between Zionism and Judaism. The Jewish religion has existed for about 3,000 years. And in contrast, Zionism, which is the transformation of the Jewish religion into a nationality, was the idea of an Austrian man called Theodor Herzl. Now, Theodor Herzl published this book called Der Judenstaat in 1896. Okay, it says here the modern attempt to solve the Jewish issue. Now, Theodor Herzl and Zionists see Judaism not as a faith, but as a national identity. And in his book, the question is stated of founding a Jewish state, and three different places are proposed. One of them is Argentina, the other one is Uganda, and the third one, or the other one, is Palestine. However, in 1917, Great Britain gave official backing to the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine through the so-called Balfour Declaration. Arthur Balfour was the British Foreign Secretary, and he sent a letter to Lord Rothschild expressing the British support for the creation of a Jewish state. However, as you can see here in the original Balfour Declaration, it stated that the achievement of this objective entailed that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. A principle that unfortunately has not been fulfilled. However, there was another situation that had a great influence on the establishment of the so-called Jewish state in Palestine, and that was the genocide committed under World War II by the National Socialists in Germany, in the Third Reich. The mass extermination of huge Jewish populations in the occupied countries definitely had an impact on the proposal of creating a Jewish state where the Jews could feel safe. So then Israel was officially created by Resolution 181 of the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1947, although the state was founded in May 1948. The partition of Palestine took place in May 1948, and it resulted in the eviction of non-Jews from the newly created state of Israel, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, or the Great Catastrophe. However, not all Jews were happy with the creation of Israel. There was a great deal of criticism from Orthodox Jewish congregations because they maintain that any secular political state established by human endeavor lacks religious legitimacy, because for Orthodox Jews, only God can establish a Jewish state, and not the United Nations. And well, the reality is that since the establishment of Israel in 1948, the territory has been growing and growing. Let's observe here the size of the West Bank and compare it to the West Bank in 1949, subsequently in 1967, and nowadays. Observe all of the golden dots here, which are the Israeli settlements. By the way, they are illegal according to international law. Observe, please, the size of the Gaza Strip when Israel was founded in 1948 and the Gaza Strip nowadays. Is Israel a democracy? Well, in Israel, there are laws for Jews and for non-Jews. For example, regarding immigration and citizenship, the law of return of 1950 grants any Jewish person, as well as their children or grandchildren, no matter from what country they come, the immediate right to immigrate to Israel and automatically obtain citizenship. That is not the case for Palestinians who have lived in the region or in the territory for generations. Regarding naturalization, non-Jews who seek Israeli citizenship do not qualify for the law of return and instead must apply under the citizenship law, which requires a certain number of years of residency, language proficiency, renunciation of prior citizenship, and at the end of the day, it is the Ministry of the Interior who decides who obtains citizenship and who doesn't. Regarding family law and personal status, well, Israel nowadays has a confession-based legal system which was inherited from Ottoman rule. That is, there is no general civil family court for marriages or divorces performed inside the country. That means that if you're Jewish, you have to get married in a synagogue. If you're Christian, you have to get married in a church. If you're Muslim, you have to get married in a mosque. It doesn't matter whether you are a believer or not. And other personal status matters. For example, divorce, burial rights are governed exclusively by the state-sanctioned religious authority of each citizen's registered group. Again, no civil authorities exist that can perform a divorce or arrange for burials. What are some structural limitations faced by non-Jews in Israel? Well, regarding land access, planning laws, residency rights, and freedom of movement, Jews have rights that Christians and Muslims do not have. Regarding political pluralism, yes, it's true that Israel has a multi-party parliamentary system. However, not everyone living under Israeli rule has the right to vote. Israel rules over 3 million Palestinians living in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. These people have been under Israeli rule for decades, but have no right to vote or run for office, while the 435,000 illegal settlers do have a right to vote. Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, the law of 2018. Now, according to this law, Israel is the historical homeland and the nation state of the Jewish people. This law states that the right to exercise national self-determination is unique to the Jewish people. Christians and Muslims may not exercise national self-determination. The law designates Hebrew as the official state language, relegating Arabic to a special status, and it highlights Jewish settlement as a national value. Remember that the West Bank settlements are seen as illegal and contrary to international law by the United Nations. Now, how is it to live as a Christian or a Muslim in Israel? Well, attacks against Christians and Muslims have culminated with the eviction of these minorities from neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, for example, the Armenians. who have been systematically harassed, and the police does very little or nothing to protect them. We go to the third part of the presentation. Is Israel a democracy? Well, in practice, there is no equality of rights in Israel. Only the Jews in Israel have a right to self-determination, as we just saw. Religious belonging is what determines citizenship, because the law of return only applies to Jews. It doesn't matter where the Jews come from. Jewish settlement is seen as a national value, thus fostering the illegal occupation of the West Bank. And as we have seen, there is in practice no religious freedom, because if you want to get married and you happen to be a non-believer, you have to leave the country, or if you want to get a divorce, you have to do the same. The police does not protect non-Jews from vicious attacks, according to the reports of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. So, if Israel lacks so many characteristics of a democracy, what type of political system does it have? Well, as we have seen, it is not a nation state, because Israel has immigrants from many different countries of the world. Its inhabitants do not share the same roots, the same history, or the same traditions, as they come from totally different areas of the globe. Israel has elements of a theocracy, because only religious institutions can perform marriage, divorce, and burial rites. And as we have seen, there is no rule of law in practice, because laws apply differently depending on the religious confession of the person. Thus, we can conclude that Israel is a members club built upon occupied territory. I thank you for your attention, and I want to remind you to buy your book, Education for Democracy in the 21st Century. Thanks again for your attention, and see you soon.